Last time we were discussing, and hopefully this week we'll finish up the topic. We're discussing the Indian of the evolution of Kabbalah, the transmission of Kabbalah. Until now, we've been discussing how it was transmitted, and we basically explained that historically speaking, the spreading of Kabbalah and the wide knowledge of its existence and its influence basically goes up and down throughout history. In the beginning, when we had prophets, it was very much widespread, very much part of the public consciousness. And again, as we explained, it was necessary in order to allow the existence of prophecy. It was necessary, and that light of Kabbalah was pervasive throughout the Jewish people. And again, as we explained, as Nevuah ended with the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, and as the generations went on, and divine inspiration became more and more rare and more difficult and more dangerous to attain, so Kabbalah, therefore, along with that also became more and more rare, much less known, and its influence was felt much less in the Jewish people. What I explained, however, was that all this really changed with the Arizal. The Arizal saw himself as the beginning of a new time period, and that generation Bechlal as a time period of the beginning of Ikvus the Mashiach, the time period of Mashiach beginning to come, the process of Gul beginning to take place. And because of that, it was understood by the Arizal and his colleagues that now it's time to start beginning to teach in a more public way and to Kabbalah, and to allow Kabbalah's influence and philosophy, so to speak, and spiritual character to start influencing and spreading and really becoming absorbed in Jewish consciousness once again. And from that time on, really, not only has the knowledge of Kabbalah become well known throughout the Jewish people and well accepted throughout the Jewish people, even though throughout the generations you still have some holdouts that don't claim that it's part of Torah and all that. But that's, as Ramosha Cardavero, who is one of the greatest Mekubalim in Tzvat before the Arizal came, the Ramak, he goes down in history as one of the greatest Mekubalim of all. He writes in his main magnum opus, Pardes Rimonim, he writes at length how someone that once Kabbalah has become revealed in a very open way to the masses at that time period, it's now so clear as a part of Torah, not just any part, as the essence, as the heart and soul of Torah itself. Anyone who denies its existence and its truthfulness is a heretic, is considered as if he's denying any portion of Torah, as if he's denying Chumash itself, and so on. So once that time period, for sure, there's no question that Kabbalah is now much more accepted in the Jewish people, and its influence is felt very much within our philosophy, within our hashkafas, within our daily activities. Just on this side, to point out something, Hasidus in particular, this is also a very, very crucial point. Hasidus in particular, Baal Shem Tov came and he established Hasidus, the new way of serving Hashem called Hasidus. The truth is, it's not really a new way. What Hasidus basically is just a developing of the same thing. What the Arizal began, which was spreading the knowledge of Kabbalah and letting the Kabbalah's influence permeate amongst the Jewish people, what the Baal Shem Tov did was take that just to the next level. What I mean to say is what Hasidus is taking the concepts of Kabbalah, which even from the Arizal and on, it remains pretty aloof and very sophisticated and only accessible, even though the knowledge of it was pervasive, the existence of it was pervasive amongst the Jewish people. But as far as accessing that level of knowledge, that level of kedusha that's found in Kabbalah, that was still very, very difficult for the average person to do. What Hasidus did was just further this growth and this spreading of Kabbalah's influence. And what Hasidus is, it takes the concepts of Kabbalah and turns it into Lamaisa, and shows how every single Jew in their particular life can attach himself to these great mysteries of Torah through him being honest in business, through him eating properly, through him living properly, and so on. This is something we'll be touching on in a little bit soon. But this is how it goes. So Kabbalah was, again, very, very widespread in the beginning. It goes down, then it comes back up with the Arizal until Mashiach comes. Now, when we started this whole thing a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that there's two basic questions that we should be discussing. One question is, how did it happen that you could have the Rambam and the whole school of Rishonim, as great as they were, that did not have access, they did not know about Kabbalah? That's question number one, which I hope it became clear over the past couple of weeks how that happened historically. But number two, the deeper question, and I think the more important question, is why did such a thing happen? Why did Hashem make it in such a way where the Rambam, as great as the Rambam was, and as how much Torah he knew and helped Klal Yisrael, why did Hashem make it in such a way where he was not allowed to have access to the most unbelievably deep aspect of Torah, which is Pnimis Torah, which is Kabbalah itself? Why was that part of Torah kept away from him, so to speak? It doesn't seem to be fair. It doesn't seem to fit with his greatness. And question is, and another question one can ask is, did this at all affect his spirituality? I mean, we don't even want to say so. We don't even want to think such a thing. Is it possible that it affected his greatness? So what's interesting, to answer this question of why Hashem did it in such a way, so I'll tell you something. There's a sefer that discusses this. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Ishbitzer, Meir Shalech, Rav Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz. Ishbitz, he was a colleague of the Kotzker. He branched off to make his own way. Eventually, his Chassidus developed into Razin, the Raziner, that's from Ishbitz. So Rav Mordechai Yosef's son, generally speaking, the Ishbitzers and the Raziners are very they didn't care too much about what people thought about them. They said what they thought was right, and that's it. There's actually a tradition we have that when the Raziner Rebbe was killed in the Holocaust, the previous Raziner Rebbe, the Nazi that shot him, before he was shot, he went over to the Nazi and gave him a smack across the face. They were tough. They stood for what they believed in. So the Ishbitzer's son, his name is Rav Yaakov. So Rav Yaakov wrote his commentary on Chumash of Beis Yaakov. In his introduction to that commentary, he has a very, again, like I said, they said what they believed. He goes on a whole thing to discuss the history, the evolution of Kabbalah and how it's transmitted. And he talks about the Rambam. He talks about this issue. Why was it that the Rambam was completely in the world of philosophy that didn't have access to these things? Even though, if you look in that introduction, the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov Ishbitzer does seem to be that the Rambam did know Kabbalah, but he just kept a part of him secret. There's no question the vast majority, the general approach is not like that. The Rambam did not have access to these things. The question is why. So the answer to this is rooted in something that the Arizal talked about, and this is one of the basic fundamental principles of Hasidus as well, which is when Hashem created the world, he created the world in such a way where there are sparks of holiness, Nitzutze Kedusha. There are sparks of holiness, which means there's some element of godliness that Hashem scattered throughout the universe, throughout the world, in a very hidden way, and they hid them in the darkest of places, in very, very, physical, ugly places. And the job of the Jewish people, taught the Arizal, the main function of the Jewish people is to go around the world, doing what we do, our Avodas Hashem and so on, to rescue, to uplift, and to redeem, so to speak, these sparks of holiness, to somehow connect to godliness in all sorts of places. And the Arizal taught that this is the function of Golus. Golus is not just, according to the Arizal and teachings of Kabbalah, exile is not something that, obviously Golus is not something that we like and we enjoy. We'd rather have redemption. But the Arizal taught that Golus is not a b'diavad. Exile is not something that, what can we do? We're in exile. We have to just wait for Mashiach to come. The Arizal taught that there's something that's good that takes place in Golus. Said the Arizal, because of the diminished stature, because we weren't able to handle Eretz Yisrael in the Beis Hamikdash, Hashem had no choice, so to speak, but to take us out of Eretz Yisrael and to scatter us throughout the four corners of the world. And the Jewish community travels from country to country to country to country, from place to place. And said the Arizal, what takes place during our traveling and during our dealing with exile is that we're actually uplifting and redeeming and rescuing these sparks of holiness that find themselves in America, that find themselves in South America, that find themselves in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, all the four corners of the world. Hashem, when He created the world, He scattered and He embedded these sparks of holiness, these aspects of His presence in these crazy places. And if the Jewish people were just in Eretz Yisrael, we wouldn't be able to necessarily attract to us these sparks of holiness if we weren't on such a level. So Hashem had on His level, had no choice, so to speak, but to scatter us throughout the exiles. And by us, committing to Yiddishkeit, despite the difficulties that we find in Golus, that what that means is that we are uplifting these sparks of holiness that we find in all these places. And the result taught we're coming to Pesach. Chazal say that when we left Mitzrayim, when we left Egypt, we left it like a silo without wheat. So on the simple interpretation of that Gemara, it means that we took all the money, we took all the riches from Mitzrayim, and they were left very poor. It said there is on a deeper level, what the Gemara is hinting to is this idea that when the Jewish people leave a certain country because of exile, during the exile, for whatever the political reason might be, the deeper explanation of what's taking place is that Hashem has seen fit that all the sparks of holiness in that area have already been redeemed, have already been uplifted, and therefore the job of the Jewish people is now to move on, to go to a different country. Now, the Arizal also taught, and this is where we're going to get to the Rambam, the Arizal also taught that these sparks of holiness are not only found in physical places, they're not only found in physical places that a Jew might find himself, but even in ideologies and philosophies that exist among the nations of the world, these sparks are also there in a very, very hidden way. Godliness can be found in everything. So the Arizal said that the deeper, the darker, the more dangerous a place that a spark of God's presence finds itself, the greater the neshama, the greater the tzaddik that is necessary to come redeem it. Right? If you're on a rescue mission, and the rescue mission, the area that a soldier has to go to rescue a certain captive is a very, very dangerous place behind enemy lines, then he has to be a very, very good soldier in order to accomplish this mission. The average soldier is not going to have the strength to do it. He's not going to know how to do it. So said the Arizal, the darker the place, and this is where Hasidus focuses on as well. The darker the place, the more difficult the place, the more the Yetzer Hara is found and impurity is found in that place, the greater the tzaddik that is necessary to find godliness and to redeem godliness in that place as well. So there's a concept we find in Rabbi Nachman Tzvarim for sure, that one of the greatest klipas, one of the greatest Yetzer Haras and evil impurities found in the world is philosophy. Because you have to understand that historically speaking, what philosophy deteriorated into was atheism. That's really what philosophy was. It was all about believing in nothing more than what we can understand with our mind, with our intellectual mind. Seeing is believing. Nothing exists beyond what we can prove. And that's a very, very dangerous klipa. It's a very difficult and impure place. The Jewish people are rooted in emunah, rooted on faith, and this is the opposite of faith. So therefore, said the Beis Yaakov, said the Ishbitzer, Hashem has a spark of holiness even contained in that ugly place called philosophy, that ugly place called self-obsessed, self-obsession with one's own intellect. There's godliness found in there. But because of its difficulty, because of it's so dangerous to be there, Hashem had to send one of the greatest tzaddikim of all time to penetrate that area and to somehow remain pure, not just remain pure, but to bring godliness into that place, to redeem godliness from that place, and to somehow help all the thousands and thousands of Jews that were stuck in such a tum, in such an impurity. And that was the Rambam. So it wasn't God forbid because of anything lacking in the Rambam that he was kept away from Kabbalah. It was the exact opposite. Because of the Rambam's greatness and because of the elevation of his neshama, he was therefore chosen for this specific mission. One of the things that he was chosen for was to descend into philosophy, descend into that dark place, and to somehow not just remain a believer in Yiddishkeit, but to develop emunah in Hashem and in Torah through philosophy and in philosophy. By doing that, giving life and giving a way out to all those thousands and thousands of Jews that were completely falling off the derech because of the pull of philosophy. And this is something that the Arizal and all the Sfarim discuss. This is why every single Jew, all the difficulties that a Jew finds himself in, the place that you live in, the difficulties whether it comes to parnasa, raising children, all the inyanim that make a person's life unique. What the Arizal taught, and this is something that Hasidus definitely focused on, is that nothing's a b'diavad. Every single inyan that takes place in a Jewish person's life is custom made specifically for your neshama, and for your neshama to accomplish its specific mission, to raise up and to redeem a spark or a piece of a spark. Now, by the way, how many sparks are there? Just on the side, in the writings of the Arizal, we find that there are 3 different levels of sparks. There are 3 different types of sparks. There's one spark which, again, I can't get into details now, obviously, but just the numbers. There's one type of spark which is 380. There's 380 type A sparks. There is 320 type A. There are 280 type B and 288 type C. And these are the types of sparks that exist in the universe. And every Jewish neshama has a certain spark that's connected to them specifically, that their job is to uplift it, either the entire spark itself, which would take a very big neshama, or at least a part of that spark. And that's what makes each individual neshama different. That's what makes each individual person's life different. Because everything that we go through is custom made for our neshama to be able to uplift that specific part of us. And therefore, there are some Jews that they're born to be businessmen. There are some Jews that are born to be involved in chesed. There are some Jews that are born to be involved specifically in davening. There are some Jews that are born to be involved in learning. Every single person has their mission, has their specific tafkid, their specific lot in life, and nothing's a b'diavad. Nothing is, halavai, I wish I should be someone else. There's no such thing. If you're created in such a way with a specific talents, with a specific area in life that you find yourself in, that means that's your thing to fix. That's your spark to uplift, and that's your job. And just like the Rambam had an unbelievable job of uplifting, finding godliness in philosophy, in that dark place called philosophy, every single one of us, based on whatever our position, our situation in life, that's our job, to find godliness and to uplift godliness in all these places. And I think this is an important thing to remember. This is what Hasidus did. That teaching of the Rizal, of this idea of sparks of holiness being scattered throughout the universe, this became a major focus in Hasidus of B'kol Derechecha De'eu, of finding Hashem and connecting to Hashem in all situations, in all areas of life, whether it be the seemingly mundane or the holy. Everything has to be connected to Hashem. And again, it's coming from this unbelievable, very important message from the Arizal, that everything is a mission for us to accomplish, to redeem, to uplift the sparks of holiness. And I think with this, maybe we'll end this topic of discussing Kabbalah and how it affects. And again, over this year, I'm sure it'll come up again, of how the influence of Kabbalah, is felt in our hashkafa, in just our approach to Yiddishkeit and our approach to life itself. Okay, so I guess maybe we'll stop here if there's any questions.
Okay, so we had one question. You hear me, Yossi?
Yeah.
So we had one question that was submitted, and it occurred to me while you were just speaking that maybe that's another topic for a series of discussions. So I'll present you the question, but you may want to say that we want to put that for another topic, which is, if a person is struggling with Nisayan, why should he daven or ask for help? Shouldn't he just embrace his Nisayan so he can accomplish his personal spark for Klal Yisrael?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and you're probably right. That is something that's probably could like to keep for an entire discussion in and of itself. But the truth is that opens up a general issue, which again I think it's important that we should discuss this. How does a person know? It's really part of a bigger question. How does a person know that what he's doing is his mission? Is it possible to mess up? Is it possible to spend an entire lifetime thinking that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and after 120, it'll turn out, sorry, buddy, you missed the boat. You should have been doing A instead of doing B, and we'll have to send you back down. Is that possible? And if it is possible, what are the signs that we have in our tradition? Do we have any telltale signs of knowing of what we're doing is correct? And then obviously that opens up into davening. If a person does find himself in the wrong situation, then how does a person get out of it? And how does a person find his right situation? So this definitely opens up a lot of very, very important questions in hashkafa. To Bechlal, the whole approach of what we're here for. How does a person know that what he's doing is correct? So you're probably right. That's probably something that we should do. We should dedicate maybe a series to that.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for anybody who wants to ask a question by voice, but I had one question before that, which was, are you saying with the Rambam, with his mission to bring those Jews that were stuck into the negative aspects of philosophy, are you saying that if he would have been exposed to Kabbalah, that somehow would have prevented that mission?
Yeah, because if the Rambam would have been exposed to Kabbalah, as we find with the Mekubalim, there's once we find this, by the way, very much in the Rishonim as well, that once they are open to Kabbalah, then philosophy becomes so repugnant and so small and so close-minded and so just narrow to them that they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. That's what happened historically. That's why the greatest Mekubalim of all they completely look down on philosophy and look at a Judaism-based philosophy as a very small, narrow, dry, dead thing. And therefore, if the Rambam would have been influenced by Kabbalah, it's very unlikely that he would have focused so much energy and intellectual capability and so much spiritual energy on developing a system of Emunah that's based on philosophy. So it was dafka because he was held away from Kabbalah that gave him his ability that focused him on philosophy, and gave him and through that he developed in Wtntu an entire philosophy of Yiddishkeit, which gave, like I said, which gave life to thousands and thousands of Jews. If, however, he would have been influenced by Kabbalah, it's very, very unlikely that he would have focused that much energy on developing faith in philosophy. Very difficult to say that.
Was just for historical perspective, was the time of the Rambam completely void of Kabbalah, or was it the Rambam specifically? Were there other contemporaries of his that were exposed to Kabbalah?
Yeah, no, so for sure. As I mentioned before, in Ashkenaz, in Europe, the vast majority of leaders of Rishonim were all Mekubalim. Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, the Rakech, they were all Mekubalim. So in Ashkenaz, Kabbalah was very much pervasive. Again, maybe not on the level of post-Arizal, but there's no question the leadership in Ashkenaz were definitely influenced by Kabbalah. Within Spain, see, the Rambam was in Egypt. In Egypt, Kabbalah was very rare. In Egypt, the main thing was philosophy, and that's where the Rambam developed. In Spain, also you had a mix. On the one hand, you did have the Ramban and his school, which were all Mekubalim. On the other hand, in Spain, you had other Rishonim, Rashbash, and so on, that were completely philosophy based. So isn't it in Ashkenaz? I'm talking about as far as the leaders are concerned. In Ashkenaz, they were all Mekubalim. In Egypt, they were all philosophers. In Spain, there was kind of a mix, 50-50. But there's no question that there were thousands and thousands of Jews in Spain and in Egypt and so on in the Far East that were completely unaware of Kabbalah and were completely, they looked at philosophy as the main aspect of what Torah is about. In Europe, it wasn't like that. In Europe, it wasn't like that at all. In Europe, again, the average person didn't necessarily know about Kabbalah and on the level that maybe we know about it today, but Kabbalah was more pervasive in Europe than it was in Spain and Egypt. That's why when the Moreh Nevuchim, when the Guide to Perplex that the Rambam wrote, which is all philosophy-based Yiddishkeit, when it reached Europe, it was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. That's why you find it was burned in the streets and no one was allowed to read it. It was completely outside of their comfort zone because they were all coming from a Kabbalah-based Yiddishkeit. In Spain, it wasn't looked at as askance at all. In Spain and Egypt, it was promoted as the basic ideas of Yiddishkeit. And this is how Klal Yisrael were sort of broken in two. When the result came, it sort of brought all Klal Yisrael together in a much, in an even greater way of Kabbalah being the main thing main thing of Yiddishkeit. But even during Chazar Shalom, we had these two schools for sure.
Well, we just got another anonymous question. That when you study history, when you look at the history of the Rishonim, there seems to be a sense that the Rambam purposely avoided Kabbalah. Are you saying that that's incorrect, or is that a different shita?
There are two different, but like I said, the vast majority of opinions is that the Rambam didn't have access to the tradition of Kabbalah. That's the vast majority. That's the opinion of the vast majority of commentaries, that the Rambam just didn't have access to it, and therefore those people that didn't have access to it, they look at it. Not only do they look at it as ridiculous, but some people would look at it as dangerous, as even sometimes heretical. There's a famous tshuva written by the Rashbash, who was a student of a student of a student of the Ramban, and he himself was pretty much far removed from the Ramban enough that he was not into Kabbalah at all. And he in fact said a famous line, and this is something that all the Mekubalim cringe from, but he wrote a line. He said that the Christians have their 3 and the Mekubalim have their 10, which is a scary line. But obviously the Mekubalim, if a person understands Kabbalah, there's absolutely nothing, you can't compare it at all to the Trinity Godfrey, which is absolute heresy and idolatry, and Kabbalah is not like that at all. But just to show that if someone who's not attached to Kabbalah doesn't have such a tradition, not only is it completely foreign to him, but it could be looked at as heretical stuff. You're talking about God's names and different spheres, and it's a little bit crazy. So that's one approach. The Rambam just didn't have access to it. Like I mentioned, the Beis Yaakov, the Ishbitzer's son, there is a small minority, by him headed by him, that believe the Rambam did know Kabbalah and he wasn't a Kabbalah. He just hid it. He completely hid it from public knowledge in order that he should be able to help and delve into philosophy and to help those Jews. Like I said, it's possible. There's no, whatever. It is what it is. It doesn't have any halachic relevance at all. But these are the two approaches. Like I said, generally speaking, the general approach is the Rambam just didn't have access to these things.
Okay. I'm going to just unmute it in case anybody else wants to ask any questions by voice. Anybody go ahead, because it's everybody's unmuted. Okay. Anybody? There was one final question, just a technical question. You talked about the fact that when Jews left a certain country, they took all the nitzotzos with them. Is that possibly one of the reasons for the idea that a Jew is not supposed to go back to Egypt, or at least not any kind of permanent basis?
It's very, very possible. Now, we do find such a thing that once the Jewish people leave, again, halachically speaking, there's very, very rare. It's a very, very rare thing that once the Jewish people leave, you're halachically not allowed to return. Egypt is one of those places. Again, famously, the Rambam lived in Egypt, and it's also famous that supposedly, again, it's not 100% clear, but it could be that that there is such a thing that on his letters he would sign, Moshe ben Maimon, the one who's violating 3 prohibitions a day, and one of them is living in Egypt. Again, what are the halachic parameters of living in Egypt and so on? That's not for now. It's an interesting discussion, but it's not for now. But the concept, though, of why a person's not allowed to return to Egypt, the Sfarim do mention such a thing, that once Egypt was so sucked out of holiness, even though there's no question there has to be some residue just giving it existence, because if God's presence was completely sucked out, it wouldn't exist anymore. But there's no question that the level of holiness was so sucked out that, yeah, it's not looked at as a positive thing to live there anymore. We do find historically that even though the Jews left, there were still some holdouts that did remain. And al pi Kabbalah, it is taught in the Rizal, again, this is going to be opening something else up, but maybe for another discussion. There is such a thing that Rizal taught, that even when a spark is redeemed and uplifted and returned to the Jewish people, so to speak, it doesn't mean that it's still completely detached from that place. It just means that now it's back home in its rightful place in the Jewish people, and it's through the Jewish people that energy of Hashem, that spirit of Hashem, is now giving life to that piece of Gullus. Meaning, instead of that area, let's say, whatever that country is, let's say Spain, instead of Spain actually kidnapping that part of Hashem, that aspect of Hashem's presence, to sustain itself and to suck life force from Hashem, that piece of Hashem's presence is when the Jewish people, and it's just through the Jewish people, and in a healthy, measured way, there's a life force that's sustaining Spain. Those Jews that remain there, they could be the embodiment of that bridge that sort of connects the Jewish people and that spark that has been redeemed to still give the right amount of sustenance and right amount of God's presence into that place. And I know this is probably out there a little bit, but there is such an idea. You are right that there is such an idea of that Jews, once we leave a place, there's a reason why we left it. And again, I'm not to say that it's us to go back. It's not. But there's such a thing, that if we moved on, it's time to move on.
Okay, shkoyach. Everybody's unmuted again. If anybody has any last questions, if not, we'll pick it up next week, Emir Hashem. And if anybody has any feedback on the shir, content, style, anything like that, please email us, because this is still a work in progress. We're still considering this the beta version, and we'd like to tweak it. So what? Yeah, and if you know of anybody else who might be interested in the shir, give them my email address, ask them to have them email me to add them to the list. I'll happily do so. All right, shkoyach, everybody. Shkoyach Yossi, thank you.
Bye-bye.